Hello everyone, welcome back. So, up to this point, we have talked about the establishment of issues in Africa. We have started to talk about the legacies or the impacts of colonialism, and now we're going to get to some really specific things that have occurred in Africa due to those legacies of imperialism and colonialism. And really, the two main ones that I'd like to get into first are civil wars and genocide. These are two things that are just absolutely brutal in Africa, and we're not going to talk about them because, frankly, we just don't have enough time because there are so many. Now, there's a variety of reasons why these wars start. Sometimes you have border issues when you get wars between tribal groups that, again, were put there by Europeans. You've got ethnic disagreements, that's going to be a really big one. In that two different ethnic groups or multi-ethnic groups in countries no longer want to be run by another ethnic group, and so they start to fight. You have this idea of tribalism. Tribalism is the concept that people are more loyal to their tribe than the country that they're in, which causes fracturing. You also have dictatorships that develop. Most of the African nations, when they were ruled by the Europeans, were ruled by dictators, and as a result, many people adopt that mode of governance. And then the main one is, if you remember, I talked about this in the previous film. When the Europeans occupied this area, they didn't develop business, they took all the resources, and when African nations gained their freedoms, they had no economic basis. These governments come in, they can't provide jobs, people fall into poverty, and then as a result, wars will occur. And I mean, this is just a list. So here's the first page. If you look at these are a variety of civil wars, and this is just in Africa. As you can see, a variety of these are still going on. The insurgency wars, actually, there's still a Tuareg rebellion. I mean, the country of Chad itself had 3 different civil wars, one that lasted for 14 years, one that lasted for 20 years, and then one lasted for 7 years. So that's 41 years of civil war, since 1965. I mean, how can anything even happen? Here's more. Somalia is in the middle of like a 5-way civil war. Eritrea, their war of independence against Ethiopia. Djibouti, Rwanda had a civil war and a genocide at the same time. Uganda had a genocide, and as soon as the genocide was done, they had a civil war. And again, you have Guinea-Bissau and Liberia and Nigeria, Sierra Leone, the Central African Republic, which is going on right now. The Democratic Republic of Congo has a war going right now, and they've had at least 10 since 1960. And then also you have an Angolan civil war. And again, this isn't even all of them. You have wars between multiple nations as well. But as far as civil war is concerned, we're going to talk about one nation that is probably epitome of what happened, as well as with European involvement once again, and that is the country of Sierra Leone. If you see on the bottom right here, I'm going to move the mouse around it. Sierra Leone's this tiny little country over here. Okay, and as you can see, it's actually fairly idyllic. You have the Atlantic Ocean right here. It is a beautiful city. However, the problem with Sierra Leone is has always been an unstable country. They've never really been able to get a government. Sometimes they'd have a government, it was taken over by the military, who would be taken over by another aspect of the military. And the only really thing that has kept Sierra Leone afloat as a country for so long has been diamonds. And let's talk about diamonds. They're very valuable. We'll talk about how that value is a little bit rigged later on, but this is a diamond mine. As you can see, it's very huge. Diamonds are very special in that they were created in volcanoes long, long ago that were a very particular kind of underground volcanoes, and the stress and the pressure of all of the heat basically turned coal that was in the area into diamonds. Eventually, those volcanoes erupt and it actually rains diamonds. And so there's only certain areas of the world where you have them. Many of those areas are in Africa. Okay, but this is what it looks like. You just see these men digging in these just giant piles of dirt. Sometimes they have areas that have been inundated by water, so they're sifting and sifting until they find that. That, my friends, is an uncut diamond that we'll talk about more in a minute. And that man is holding a diamond that is probably worth more money than he'll ever make in his entire life. Most of these workers make around $2 a day, if not less. It's really, really tough and brutal work, but nonetheless, there's a huge demand for diamonds. That's why they do it. Unfortunately, in Sierra Leone, in 1991, the Civil War breaks out. And the reason why it breaks out is because they just are completely broke. The government could not fix the economy. You had millions of people out of work. Finally, a group called the RUF, or the Revolutionary Force, gets together and they are going to fight the government. But what's going to be different about the RUF? In some cases, they are considered to be a terrorist group, and so they start to target civilians. In the course of this war, over 50,000 civilians will be killed, and then over 1 million will be displaced. In order to take over certain areas of the country, the RUF would storm into villages, threaten to kill people, and basically make the villages provide for them food and money for things that they would need. But because it was a small nation in West Africa, it got really little to no coverage, even though outside nations could have helped to stop it, but in the end they won't. But this war takes a very kind of dastardly turn, which is kind of one of the hallmarks of African civil wars. If you see this man on the right here, you see he's got a gun, and you can see obviously he's got some people in front of him digging. The problem for the RUF is that in order to fight this war, they need weapons. And weapons aren't cheap. Now, they're available illegally, but you still need money. Their solution would be the diamonds. What they start to do is target diamond mines, and they would take over diamond mines and the villages around them. They would then force the people to basically work in slavery to get the diamonds for them. Now, I have here how the system works. Uncut diamonds, or diamonds that have never been brought into stores, if you will, are almost impossible to trace. There's no fingerprint on them, there's no code on them, and so what they would do is that they would basically have these people, again, work in slave labor type conditions. They would take the diamonds, they would go sell the diamonds, which I'll explain that more in a moment, take that money, and then go buy their illegal weapons. Now, the reason why this system works is because the demand for diamonds was kept up, which I'm going to explain more in a minute. So since they had an item of value that people wanted, they could continue this war. And what they would do is that they would go into villages and they would terrorize them, and they would chop off people's hands, I'll tell you this a big time, and force them to work to keep them in line by threat of violence. Now, the reason why this war would go on for so long, from 1991 to all the way 2002, is that the diamond companies of the world were actually buying these diamonds knowingly. The biggest company, which is the biggest diamond company in the world, De Beers, was really at fault for this. De Beers is a European company. They actually invented the concept of the engagement ring. Now, you may have never seen an ad for De Beers in the United States of America because it's actually illegal for them to do that. De Beers knew that these revolutionaries were killing people and illegally smuggling out diamonds, and they allowed those diamonds to be bought by their representatives in Africa because they could buy them cheaper. The fact of the matter is the RUF wasn't going to haggle over price like a government-owned diamond mine. They just needed any money they could have. So here you have a European nation that actually kept this war going. Had they refused to buy the diamonds and put pressure on some other groups to do the same, this war would in all likelihood have stopped because the RUF would not have had the money to continue it. But nonetheless, De Beers wanted their diamonds, because in the end, De Beers controls 90% of the diamonds in the world. They're the ones that set the prices in the world. They keep most of the world's diamonds in storage, only releasing certain amounts of them each year. So now they could get these diamonds even cheaper, still charge their same costs, and in the end, make even more money. It's absolutely deplorable, but that's what happened. Now, here are some pictures by Yannis Kontos, who was a photographer that actually snuck into Sierra Leone. On the left, you have a member of the RUF, And as you can see there, he's holding a machete. On the right is a man that unfortunately met that machete. As you can see, both of his hands were chopped off. They would periodically chop off people's hands. They could still make them carry stuff on their backs, but it would keep everybody else in line. And this is perhaps his most famous picture of this young man here who had both his hands amputated. The other concern that also develops here, and we'll talk about this more long term, is the use of child soldiers. Yes, you see these kids with a RPG, or this right here is a rocket-propelled grenade, and machine guns. The fact of the matter is so many people were either being killed or were enslaved in the mines that both sides, yes, the government and the RUF, started to use children as soldiers, which I gotta say would just incredibly psychologically damage them. Many of these children were killed, and this war reached a depth of horror that we had seldom seen before. Now, eventually, they do try to end the war. The government of Sierra Leone will change in 1996. It'll go from a military-led government to a civilian government. They're able to sign an armistice or a ceasefire in 1996 to try to calm the fighting. It fails after 3 months, and it continues on, and so does the selling of the diamonds. They do break down. They finally get a peace deal done in 1999, but that peace deal broke down in 2000, until finally in 2002, the United Nations will send in British forces to defeat the RUF and end it, and the war ends in 2002. But what you see in these nations that have civil wars, and as is the case of Sierra Leone, it's just devastating. Their economy is destroyed. Yes, they still have diamonds, but that's kind of all they have. They don't get a chance to build anything else back up because you have constant fighting that destroys the nation. And so Sierra Leone, despite the presence of diamonds, is the most impoverished nations in the world. You also still have tension. The government has a lot of pressure on it, and there's lots of people that are putting pressure on the government. So there could be other events that could lead to a civil war. For instance, right now, Sierra Leone actually is one of the nations that is being hit with the Ebola plague. And I'm telling you right now, if they can't get it under control, you could see the possibility of another rebellion. The infrastructure is destroyed on the right here. This is a city actually in modern-day Somalia. You can see that it's been completely annihilated. Somalia is in the middle of a civil war. So what little roads and airports and whatnot they had are getting destroyed because of the fighting. And then, of course, you have all the deaths. So you put all these things together. I mean, how could a nation survive? And then when you look at that list of all of the nations that have had these civil wars, hopefully it gives you a deeper understanding of why we have this situation. Okay, guys, make sure we get our 3 comments, make sure we get our 5 questions, and I will see you in class tomorrow.